Chapter 7 of the Agony column. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Peak. The Agony column by Earl Durr Biggers. Chapter 7. In the course of the morning she made several mysterious inquiries of her parent regarding nice points of international law as it concerned murder, and it is probable that he would have been struck by the odd nature of these questions had he not been unduly excited about another matter. "I tell you, we've got to get home," he announced gloomily. "The German troops are ready at Aix-la-Chapelle for an assault on Liège. Yes, sir, they're going to strike through Belgium. Know what that means? England in the war. Labor troubles, suffragette troubles, civil war in Ireland. These things will melt away as quickly as that snow we had last winter in Texas. They'll go in. It would be national suicide if they didn't." His daughter stared at him. She was unaware that it was the bootblack at the Carlton he was now quoting. She began to think that he knew more about foreign affairs than she had given him credit for. "Yes, sir," he went on. "We've got to travel fast. This won't be a healthy neighborhood for non-combatants when the ruction starts. I'm going if I have to buy a liner." "Nonsense," said the girl. "This is the chance of a lifetime. I won't be cheated out of it by a silly old dad. Why, here we are, face to face with history." "American history is good enough for me," he spread-eagled. "What are you looking at?" "Provincial to the death," she said thoughtfully. "You old dear. I love you so. Some of our statesmen over home are going to look pretty foolish now in the face of things they can't understand. I hope you're not going to be one of them." "Twaddle!" he cried. "I'm going to the steamship offices to day and argue as I have never argued for a vote." His daughter saw that he was determined, and, wise from long experience, she did not try to dissuade him. London that hot Monday was a city on the alert, a city of hearts heavy with dread. The rumors in one special edition of the papers were denied in the next, and reaffirmed in the next. Men who could look into the future walked the streets with faces far from happy. Unrest ruled the town, and it found its echo in the heart of the girl from Texas as she thought of her young friend of the Agony column in durance vile behind the frowning walls of Scotland Yard. That afternoon her father appeared, with the beaming mien of the victor, and announced that for a stupendous sum he had bought the tickets of a man who was to have sailed on the steamship Saronia 3 days hence. "The boat train leaves at 10 Thursday morning," he said. "Take your last look at Europe and be ready." 3 days! His daughter listened with sinking heart. Could she, in 3 days' time, learn the end of that strange mystery, know the final fate of the man who had first addressed her so unconventionally in a public print? Why, at the end of 3 days he might still be in Scotland Yard, a prisoner. She could not leave if that were true. She simply could not. Almost she was on the point of telling her father the story of the whole affair, confident that she could soothe his anger and enlist his aid. She decided to wait until the next morning, and if no letter came then... But on Tuesday morning a letter did come, and the beginning of it brought pleasant news. The beginning, yes, but the end. This was the letter: "Dear anxious lady, is it too much for me to assume that you have been just that, knowing as you did that I was locked up for the murder of a captain in the Indian Army, with the evidence all against me, and hope a very still small voice indeed? Well, dear lady, be anxious no longer. I have just lived through the most astounding day and all the astounding days that have been my portion since last Thursday, and now in the dusk I sit again in my rooms, a free man, and write to you in what peace and quiet I can command after the startling adventure through which I have recently passed. Suspicion no longer points to me. Constables no longer eye me. Scotland Yard is not even slightly interested in me. For the murderer of Captain Fraser Freer has been caught at last. Sunday night I spent ingloriously in a cell in Scotland Yard. I could not sleep. I had so much to think of. You, for example, and at intervals how I might escape from the folds of the net that had closed so tightly about me. My friend at the consulate, Watson, called on me late in the evening, and he was very kind, but there was a note lacking in his voice, and after he had gone the terrible certainty came into my mind: he believed that I was guilty after all. The night passed, and a goodly portion of today went by, as the poets say, with lagging feet. I thought of London, yellow in the sun. I thought of the Carlton. I suppose there are no more strawberries by this time. And my waiter, that stiff-backed Prussian, is home in Deutschland now, I presume, marching with his regiment. I thought of you. At 3 o'clock this afternoon they came for me, and I was led back to the room belonging to Inspector Bray. When I entered, however, the inspector was not there. Only Colonel Hughes, immaculate and self-possessed as usual, gazing out the window into the cheerless stone court. He turned when I entered. I suppose I must have had a most woebegone appearance, for a look of regret crossed his face. "My dear fellow," he cried, "my most humble apologies. I intended to have you released last night. But, believe me, I have been frightfully busy." I said nothing. What could I say? The fact that he had been busy struck me as an extremely silly excuse. But the inference that my escape from the toils of the law was imminent set my heart to thumping. "I fear that you can never forgive me for throwing you over as I did yesterday," he went on. "I can only say that it was absolutely necessary, as you shall shortly understand." I thought a bit. After all, there was an unmistakable sincerity in his voice and manner. "We are waiting for Inspector Bray," continued the colonel. "I take it you wish to see this thing through?" "To the end," I answered. "Naturally. The inspector was called away yesterday immediately after our interview with him. He had business on the Continent, I understand. But fortunately I managed to reach him at Dover and he has come back to London. I wanted him, you see, because I have found the murderer of Captain Fraser-Freer." I thrilled to hear that, for from my point of view it was certainly a consummation devoutly to be wished. The colonel did not speak again. In a few moments the door opened and Bray came in. His clothes looked as though he had slept in them. His little eyes were bloodshot. But in those eyes there was a fire I shall never forget. Hughes bowed. "Good afternoon, Inspector," he said. "I'm really sorry I had to interrupt you as I did. But I most awfully wanted you to know that you owe me a Homburg hat." He went closer to the detective. "You see, I have won that wager. I have found the man who murdered Captain Fraser-Freer." Curiously enough, Bray said nothing. He sat down at his desk and idly glanced through the pile of mail that lay upon it. Finally he looked up and said in a weary tone: "You're very clever, I'm sure, Colonel Hughes." "Oh, I wouldn't say that," replied Hughes. "Luck was with me from the first. I am really very glad to have been of service in the matter, for I am convinced that if I had not taken part in the search it would have gone hard with some innocent man." Bray's big pudgy hands still played idly with the mail on his desk. Hughes went on: "Perhaps, as a clever detective, you will be interested in the series of events which enabled me to win that Homburg hat. You have heard, no doubt, that the man I have caught is Von der Herts, 10 years ago the best Secret Service man in the employ of the Berlin government, but for the past few years mysteriously missing from our line of vision. We've been wondering about him at the War Office." The colonel dropped into a chair, facing Bray. "You know Von der Herts, of course?" he remarked casually. "Of course," said Bray, still in that dead tired voice. "He is the head of that crowd in England," went on Hughes. "Rather a feather in my cap to get him. But I mustn't boast. Poor Fraser-Freer would have got him if I hadn't. Only Von der Herts had the luck to get the captain first." Bray raised his eyes. "You said you were going to tell me," he began. "And so I am," said Hughes. "Captain Fraser-Freer got in rather a mess in India and failed of promotion. It was suspected that he was discontented, soured on the service, and the Countess Sophie de Graf was set to beguile him with her charms, to kill his loyalty and win him over to her crowd. It was thought she had succeeded. The Wilhelmstrasse thought so. We at the War Office thought so, as long as he stayed in India. But when the captain and the woman came to London, we discovered that we had done him a great injustice. He let us know, when the first chance offered, that he was trying to redeem himself, to round up a dangerous band of spies by pretending to be one of them. He said that it was his mission in London to meet Von der Herts, the greatest of them all, and that once he had located this man we would hear from him again. In the weeks